that you've just been to the change please van and bought yourself a coffee, you've got your phone with you, and you bought a cookie, which is in the bag. Okay, and then if you can imagine you've walked back to the building and you've eaten your cookie, drunk your coffee, and you want to dispose of the cup and the bag, using any of the equipment that we've provided here.
Okay. I see. Is there some still in there?
Liquid still in there.
Yeah, I probably will do this. So if it, yeah.
Okay. Thanks on that eventuality. So the project came about because we had the opportunity to bid for some joint fund money down at the London campus, and it gave us an opportunity for both to draw on both my specialism and Debra's. So I've got a background in looking at sustainable packaging, and Debra's expertise is in behaviour change. We'd already recognised that coffee cups were a really big issue, and they seemed like a really sort of sensible area to focus on within the Here East campus, which is where the university is based. We started off by creating a cardboard prototype which we tested with 8 users, and the intention there was to check that actually the approaches that we were using were understood by users in the way that we expected, because obviously it would have been very silly to have gone straight into full quality prototypes without testing these initial things. One of the problems with the existing cups is that they're made of virgin material, and also they're lined with a polyethylene liner, which means that they have to have specialist recycling. And currently there's only 2 facilities in the UK that actually can recycle these types of cups, or any types of coffee cups really. So consequently, even if cups are collected, they typically aren't recycled. But we also know that there's big problems with the quality of the cups that are collected. Often they're very contaminated and just aren't fit for recycling. So that was one of the issues that we were looking to address through the behaviour change interventions.
So with the prototype that we designed, what we wanted to do was to encourage the user to separate the lid, the cup and the liquid, so that we could reduce contamination but also ensure that each separate component was collected in order to be recycled. So to do this, we used a number of behaviour change strategies. We used a concept called affordances and constraints, which is effectively where you use the design of the object to enable certain actions to take place, or to encourage people not to perform certain actions in line with what you're trying to achieve with the overall design. So one of the things that we'd observed earlier on was that people were stuffing sort of crisp packets or napkins or apple cores or things inside their coffee cup and then putting it into the general waste or the mixed recycling. So by stacking the cups upside down, we were basically forcing them to take those things out first, otherwise they wouldn't stack correctly. And this made it not only easy for collection, which meant that the cleaning staff could come and take an entire stack off and put them in the bin receptacle underneath, but it also meant that it was far more efficient, because by stacking the cups and stacking them inside the collection bags, they were able to collect more cups in one bag, which was more cost effective if you're paying for the number of bags that are taken away. So to achieve this, we used a number of different strategies. We had a cup-shaped mould that would encourage people to stack their cups, but we also used the concept of social proof.
So I am drawn to the fact that there's a kind of similar coloured cup here, and would stack it on top.
So social proof is effectively a kind of herd mentality where you copy the actions of others and you assume that they've performed the action correctly. So this can have some side effects, in the sense that if we'd have had users who hadn't necessarily performed the action in the correct way, had stacked their cups incorrectly, it meant that there was a chance that other people could copy that behaviour.
I quite like that there's different ones you can choose.
Okay.
It's kind of weird, but...
This really helps to recognise the shape of the cup, so that worked really well. Later I saw this is kind of a sliding thing, so it makes sense to put it in here.
Just want to go here, potentially, and then what do I do? Because I don't know what to do with paper.
I had a clear explanation for that, and when I got to that, I think I was looking for instructions,
rather than just using my head, and I had to use my head to be like, oh, there's loads of cups there, that must be where you throw it away.
I mean, I can see how you want someone to pour the drink out here and leave one part here. But for me, this doesn't say recycle your cup.
Okay.
If the last step in the process is to stack, then I would be explicit, because it makes it clear that it's a 3-step process.
We had quite a lot of issues in terms of the graphics, so we recognised that the graphics that we'd used were very low fidelity, and consequently they didn't communicate enough of the journey for the users. So we made changes as we went through the prototyping to kind of get ourselves in a position where we felt confident that the graphics that we were going to use, once they'd been tidied up a bit, would be appropriate for the final testing.
This happens because these bits are so tall and so close together that the excess plastic hasn't got time to shrink back and get out of the way. So the problem is that this is going to happen every time. It's not something that's just happened with this. And there's no way of fixing it.
We particularly had an issue with the vac forming of the cones. We'd kind of weighed up whether we felt they were too close together to properly pull, and we thought they were probably going to be okay, but actually in practice they weren't. They just kept on webbing, so we had to kind of do lots of workarounds there to be able to create what we needed with the material that we had available.
So the only option I can see for fixing that would be to have these separate, vacuum form them separate, and then cut them off and glue them in place on this piece.
In terms of the design challenges, the technicians that we worked alongside were really amazing, and they kind of came up with solutions on the fly to things that perhaps hadn't worked in the way that we'd intended when we first designed the prototype.
It isn't vinyl though, is it? It's very much definitely got a paper feel to it.
Yeah.
I was thinking more about outside in the rain, but actually if people are throwing their coffee into the unit, there's a really good chance it's going to back up on the side.
Alright, so let's see what it does. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so it is dripping off, which is good.
It's really gross.
Okay, well,
Okay.
it's leaving, it's leaving a bit of a stain. But that may dry. It stained it.
Okay. So maybe the acrylic is the right option for all of them.
I think it might be actually, to be
That
honest.
is actually really manky, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we did have the feedback that if it looked gross, people wouldn't use it. Are you ready? They look so good.
They look so good. Oh my goodness.
And look.
They look amazing. That was well worth doing.
So we ended up with some really beautiful printed acrylics, which worked really well and were definitely waterproof. I think we were quite surprised at how unwaterproof the initial graphics were. They broke the board.
Oh wow, look at this. Look. Can you see the ink coming enough.
Oh, it was meant to be vinyl.
It's meant to be waterproof. Oh.
My God.
We actually ended up with a much better product as a consequence of this sort of first iteration going wrong. This is just kind of part of prototyping, really, and it's just part of learning.
So what I'm doing is pretty much conducting observation to try to understand how users interact with these prototypes. If they follow the instruction, if they just go perhaps more intuitively towards them, or if they just completely disregard the instructions and the actual use. So we're looking at all of those things that can go right, go wrong, things that we maybe didn't think of before and can be improved in later iterations.
There is on site each day roughly about 3,000 people, so you could say 2,000 of those people have a coffee a day. Some of them might even have 2 cups a day. So through tendering our contracts, we just realised all the coffee cups we produce on site from all our cafes and restaurants are actually just going to general waste instead of being recycled. And the volume we produce on site is obviously quite concerning for us. So we're looking at new ideas to try and get them recycled and what's the best and most sustainable way to do that. But one way was potentially sending them up to Newcastle where they can recycle, but the carbon footprint to send them up there completely offsets that. So we're looking at ways to do it on site, and then we can completely segregate them from our general waste, and then we'll go from there.
I've been asked by a number of customers, probably this happens at least once each day, as to where they can recycle their cups, and not being able to provide them with any straight answer has been quite frustrating as someone that's serving them. It's a great shame considering how many we sell each day. They're compostable, the ones that we do, but up until this point have not been properly recycled, so I think it's definitely a step in the right direction to making it 100% recyclable.
Did you see that? This guy just put his cup straight in the bin. We were actually in the waste collection area within the Loughborough London site, and it was a closed area. There wasn't a great deal of ventilation, although there was a door that could open, and it was quite smelly business, but it was also really fascinating. You know, this was the real point where we were seeing whether our intervention had actually changed behaviour.
So over the course of the month, we collected in the cups across 2 different sites. One was indoor, it was at the Loughborough London campus, and the other was an outdoor site outside the Change Please van in the Here East perimeter. We collected 731 cups and slightly fewer lids because people don't always have a lid with their cup. And we audited those and determined that actually what we'd collected was good enough quality to be recycled. Although we had some footage of people using the units correctly, the best way of really determining that they had been used correctly was the fact that the lids were slotted in the holes, the liquid was poured into the slots, and the cups were stacked correctly. There was no sort of strange behaviour demonstrated by how the units were left.
And in terms of the contamination, it was really interesting to see that the outdoor unit actually had more in the way of contamination, although much less than we'd anticipated, actually. So with the outdoor unit, we tended to find things like cigarette butts and cigarette packets, chewing gum, stirrers, these sorts of things. Whereas within the indoor unit, there was very little contamination, pretty much none, which was a real result. So one of the things that we'd set out to try and do was reduce the contamination, and we certainly found that that was the case.
Across the whole audit, there was only 1 cup that had anything stuffed in it, and that had a piece of paper towel. So it's obviously not completely negated it, but across the board, people had been removing their litter before stacking. I think one of the problems with the outdoor unit was the fact that it's literally located next to the coffee van, and a lot of people, even if they're bringing their own drinks, would go out there and stand there and smoke. It was a smoker's gathering point. So I think you could certainly work around that by more careful positioning, but I think there's other design changes that could be made to help reduce the amount of contamination.
Yeah.
Though having said that, the lids were the bits that were contaminated, and they're just polystyrene lids, so they're pretty easy to be recycled anyway. So it was really a case of reducing the contamination of the cups that was most important. That came across very much that we'd achieved that through the stacking design and getting rid of the liquids.
And it was just when of see that it had worked, and every bag that we took out, and the more cups that stacked up. When we were installing the bins onto the site, we had quite a lot of people come over to us and say, oh, you know, what's this? What's happening here? And Vicky and I were talking, and we said, you know, we really need a way to kind of capture this, because people were taking photographs of them and these sorts of things. So Vicky is Vicky Lofthouse, and I'm Debra Lilley. So between it, we kind of came up with this idea of calling them Lollybins. So what we did was we created a Twitter hashtag Lollybins as a way of kind of tracking people's conversations and their interactions with the bin while they were on site as part of the trial. And it was really interesting, actually, because people were kind of tagging other authorities. We had the Mayor of London tagged as someone saying, you know, we should really have these on the underground. From a research perspective, it was quite interesting to see also the kind of level of interest that it garnered. And I think having the hashtag was quite an effective way of doing that. And it also kind of gave it a brand and an image, I guess, as well, which kind of gave us a shorthand way of talking about it, which was really good.
We were installing prototypes, so to do that we needed to have ethical clearance to install prototypes that would enable us to collect coffee cups under the guise of them being recycled, but within a context where recycling wasn't yet possible. But it meant that at the end of the 1 month trial we needed to remove the units. And we had a really kind of challenging time where the people who'd been engaging with them and championing them were really disappointed that we were taking them away. And we were asking to use them, and we had other people within the Hearies complex asking if they could also have a bin because they wanted to collect the cups as well. So it was a really interesting dilemma whereby we needed to remove them for ethical reasons, but we were in the process quite kind of disappointing our clientele. So moving into the next phases, we're going to look at developing the prototypes into bins for small-scale manufacture, because at the moment they are very much prototypes. They couldn't possibly be rolled out to any scale at all. So we need to look at how to do that, and we also want to investigate the market feasibility of that. So they're the next two stages that we'll move into after this project's finished.